All right, today we're diving into a really powerful and frankly, pretty intense argument about the very soul of a nation. We're looking at an article by Ali Urgan where he claims there's an unbreakable bond between Islam and Turkish identity. It's a perspective that, for him, leaves absolutely no room for debate. So let's break it down. So, right off the bat, this is the question at the heart of everything. And the author doesn't really leave it open for discussion. He answers it with total certainty, and that really frames the central conflict we're about to get into. And boom, there it is, the author's whole thesis, laid out in no uncertain terms. This quote really sets the tone for everything that's about to follow. For Ali Ergin, trying to separate Turkishness from Islam isn't just a mistake. He calls it an infidel mentality that he's convinced the nation will never, ever accept. To build his case, the author basically frames this whole debate as a fundamental clash of identities. He presents two completely different visions for Turkey's future, the one he's fighting for and the one he is absolutely determined to dismantle. Okay, so here's the viewpoint he's setting out to refute. And he's not just arguing against secularism in general. No, he's targeting a very specific brand of Turkish nationalism, one that looks way back to a pre-Islamic past, a past they say is rooted in shamanism. This is the idea he wants to prove is just fundamentally wrong. The author's first line of attack is all about history. He labels this whole concept of a pre-Islamic shamanist heritage as a fallacy, basically a work of fiction that he believes has to be corrected if you want to understand what it truly means to be Turkish. Now, what's really interesting here is just how directly he contrasts the two narratives. On one side, you've got the claim, "My ancestors were shamans," and on the other, his blunt response, a complete lie. He argues that ancient Turks weren't pagans at all, but were actually monotheists who believed in Göktanrı, the sky god. He then takes aim at this key figure in the debate, the Khan. From his perspective, the Khan wasn't some kind of high priest, not at all. He was more of a marginal figure, a local soothsayer or maybe even a wizard. And he argues that taking the rituals of these minor figures and using them to define the entire spiritual history of a people, well, that's just a huge misunderstanding. And he goes even further, drawing a really sharp line in the sand between Turkish history and the practices of other cultures. He's emphatic about it. Turks, he says, never made idols out of dough. They were never Zoroastrians, never idolaters, never fire worshippers. This idea of a unique, pure history is absolutely crucial to his entire argument. So, this whole history lesson is really just setting the stage for a modern-day warning. For the author, this is not just some academic debate about the past. He's arguing that trying to separate nationalism from religion is actively dangerous for Turkey today. And to make this point, he completely flips the script. He says, hey, if you want to find real historical paganism, don't look at Turkish history. Look at pre-Christian Europe. He calls it a disgusting culture of barbarism. He's basically reframing paganism as a Western thing, not a Turkish one. So here's how he connects all these dots. You really have to follow his train of thought. Step 1, a godless Turkishness is just a modern form of paganism. Step 2, he then directly equates that paganism with fascism. And finally, step 3, he concludes that this is an abhorrent primitiveness that has nothing to do with the real Turkish character. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It's not a suggestion or a maybe. It's a declaration. In his mind, the path of secular nationalism leads straight to fascism, an ideology he sees as primitive and totally, fundamentally un-Turkish. Okay, so after tearing down that secular vision, what does the author offer in its place? Well, this next part is all about his solution. This is what he sees as the only authentic form of Turkish identity. He calls it the Turk-Islam Ulkusu, or the Turkish Islamic ideal. And really, the concept is right there in the name. It's a vision of Turkish nationalism, where the nation and the Islamic faith aren't just connected. They're one and the same. They are completely inseparable. So what does this ideal actually look like? Well, it has a few core principles. First, your identity is rooted in your faith in Islam. Second, being a nationalist means serving Islam. Third, and this is a really key point for him, it completely rejects racism, which he calls a European invention. And finally, he warns that any political issues with Arab nations should never, ever become an excuse for hostility towards the religion of Islam itself. And he could not be any clearer on this point. This quote shows you just how central the rejection of racism is to his ideal. For him, the Turkish Islamic ideal is a spiritual and cultural bond, not a racial one, and that distinction is everything in his argument. So as he wraps up his article, you might expect him to soften his tone a bit. Well, he doesn't. Not at all. Instead, he issues one final, stark warning about what he believes is at stake in this whole clash of identities. He frames this secular, godless ideology as a direct and, an insidious threat. He claims its entire goal is to corrupt the nation's youth and, ultimately, to serve an agenda that is hostile to the very existence of Turkey. And here it is, his final, and by far his most severe, statement. He directly compares the people who support a secular Turkish nationalism to the PKK, a designated terrorist organization. I mean, by drawing that parallel, he's taking what might look like an ideological debate and elevating it to the level of a national security threat. And so this incredibly powerful text leaves us with a much bigger question to think about. Ali Urgan's article is really a case study in something that's happening all over the world, a battle over history. It really forces us to ask, how does the story a nation decides to tell about its own past, what it includes, what it rejects, what it fights for, how does that ultimately define its present and its future?